Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Trevor Anderson, a writer and director whose first feature, Before I Change My Mind, is a delicate and really moving study of a kid named Robin, whose indifference to gender identity in 1987 creates unexpected fault lines in their small Edmonton high school and leads to some very powerful observations about what we all do to fit in before we fully know ourselves. It's freshly available on digital and on demand in the US and Canada, and you should check it out. Trevor picked Law of Desire, Pedro Almodovar's 1987 drama about a queer filmmaker who cheats on his boyfriend with an avid fan, only to discover the fan has decided they're in love now and no one else may possess his beloved Pablo. Released the same year as Fatal Attraction, but very different in tone, and featuring a very young, up-for-anything Antonio Banderas in the role of Antonio the Stalker, it now plays, among other things, as a loving snapshot of Madrid's gay culture and a declaration of Almodovar's artistic intentions. It's kind of great. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Law of Desire is my favorite movie of all time.
Awesome.
I love it. I first saw it, I guess, in the 90s. I was working at Edmonton's Cinephile video store, which was called Sneak Preview.
Okay.
And I don't have an explicit memory of that being how I saw it, but when I think about it, it has to be. Like, that has to be how I saw it. Though I don't remember, because I don't remember anything outside the frame. I just remember whoosh being inside the frame of especially this first scene where it almost feels like you're watching like some kind of pornographic art film almost. It's not totally explicit, but there's a voice off camera instructing a young hustler to like strip and then walk to the mirror and kiss his reflection. And it's about 5 minutes of what am I watching? And thank God I'm not watching this with my parents. And, and then the frame breaks. You see the middle-aged men looping the voices, dubbing them to be added in post-production. You realize you're watching something that's been constructed. That's a big laugh. Then it freezes on a last frame. The audience applauds. The curtains close. You realize you've just watched the end of the movie made by the main character, Pablo, who is a film director. So I remember that clear as day. I have no sense of if I saw that in a theater, on a TV from a VHS tape. But when I think about it, I think it has to have come to me through my job at Sneak Preview, which is how I saw like a lot of the queer cinema of the 80s and 90s when I worked there in the 90s.
Yeah, it's shocking to me. I have a very clear memory. I saw it at the Bloor Cinema with about 25 very uncomfortable people. And it wasn't a press screening. It was just an underattended midweek screening, I think. It was that and Matador and a double bill, maybe?
Oh, my gosh.
But it was my first exposure. Maybe not my first exposure. Now that I think about it, this may have been after, because it's all scrambled up in my mind. I don't remember if it was post Women on the Verge when Almodovar became an international name, right?
I think that's when everybody started going back and looking at, because Women on the Verge was right after this.
Mm.
And so I think people went, wait, what? What's going on in Spain? Who's this?
Yeah, and how gay is it? Because that was the other thing, right? There was some question of whether or not Matador could be screened in Ontario. I think it was Matador that was cut, even though this is the film with the penises in it, and it was back-to-back screenings. I couldn't tell you what year it was, maybe 90 or 91, right. But it was back-to-back screenings on a Thursday night, I think, with audiences that were there for the sizzle, and that's not what these movies are about. Like there's sexuality and there is obviously there's a lot going on, but that's not what these movies are about. And it's in a really fascinating relationship to like the thing that fascinates me about Almodovar is that I'm not sure he's especially interested in sex on screen. There's a lot of it in his movies, but his relationship to it is always arm's length. And here, like, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Was it just you and 30 guys in trench coats?
There were a couple of women. There were dates. There were couples on dates.
Yeah.
And it was people who had probably seen Women on the Verge and like, well, I'm going to go show like my support for this artist who nobody had ever heard of before and see his early work. And it's like, oh dear, these are not that. These are like this. The thing that amazes me about Law of Desire, which I don't think I had seen since maybe the late '90s until I watched it again this week, is how everything he does is what he does in his later films, but without the money here. Like he can't afford stylization, so he's just telling the story straight.
This is why I love Law of Desire as my favorite Almodovar, because it seems to hold the key to everything.
Yeah.
Everything good that comes later, there's a seed of it in this one. And also, this is the first one where he and his brother own it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they literally own the production company. And you wonder, how does he get away with being so bold through his whole career? Well, the answer is he and his brother own the production company.
Yeah.
They kept the profits from all of those big hits. And then there was nobody to tell them, oh, don't do that. Or maybe it would be more marketable this way. Like you really get the sense that his work has not been test screened. It's just coming straight out of his soul onto the screen, which, for better or for worse, with some filmmakers, but with Almodovar, it's, great. Give me the pipeline.
Yeah, it's the raw stuff. And here it's even more raw simply because he can't afford lighting gels. Like he can't afford to make it stylish or do the color play that he does in all of his movies. It's exteriors and it's rough. And I think there's been a Blu-ray release, but not in North America. I only have a DVD.
I know. I would love that Blu-ray. I would love to have it.
There is apparently a box set that was released in Spain. I'm not sure if there was a North American version planned. There was the Sony disc collection from DVDs.
Pedro. Yep.
Yeah, the eight disc set, and I think they planned to replicate it, and then they never got around to it because they were waiting for the next movie to come out on Blu-ray. Like they wanted to make it more comprehensive, but now we're into 11 or 12 features, and I think that becomes prohibitive. So
I love this about him. He doesn't stop. Maybe if they're like, who's going to make one more? So let's put it in the collection. He's made, as you say, dozens more. Yeah. And Pain and Glory, another reason I love Law of Desire is because the recent film, what is it, 2019 maybe? Pain and Glory is like really specifically a companion piece to Law of Desire, where he's riffing on this movie he made in 1987. It's so gorgeous.
And of course, now you have the extra kick of, oh yeah, and I discovered this Banderas guy. Like he's got Banderas playing him.
Yeah.
In this wonderful winking casting coup. I mean, they've been working together off and on for decades, but it really is a full circle moment there. And then what he does with Cruz in Parallel Mothers next is similarly like loaded and fascinating. She's playing the mentor character instead of the neophyte or the ingenue.
Yeah, you get the feeling it's all part of one thing.
Yeah, his work rather feels so conscious, so thought out and intricately designed. And even the stuff that doesn't quite make sense narratively makes sense emotionally, right? Like, I mean, Law of Desire is remarkable that way. In the only other film I can think of is maybe Talk to Her, which takes that turn in the middle with an impressionistic silent film that may or may not be a confession of abuse. And what Law of Desire does is like, oh yeah, now it's about a murder. There's just this hard right turn where the charming rogue becomes an absolute. It's like Tom Ripley revealing himself effectively.
Yeah. And I have heard Almodovar say that that's like what his days are like. Like he loves to mix genres because in his life, every day it mixes genres. In one day, he'll go through a noir and a romance and a comedy and sometimes science fiction, all on a Wednesday. And so for him, it's a realistic way to represent life.
I can see that. It also explains his music choices later on, right? If he's scoring his own life in his head with these big orchestral explosions.
And I feel like Law of Desire is the moment in his filmography, early, but not the beginning, where he becomes conscious. Like that's where, to me, it's where the meta level lights up. because the movie that I mentioned, the first scene of Law of Desire, starts with our hero, Pablo, has just premiered his most recent film, which on the poster you can see it's called The Paradigm of the Muscle,
Yes.
which was an early title, discarded title for Labyrinth of Passion. And anytime you hear about what this character Pablo's work is like, it sounds like Pedro's early work. And so he's really laying in these clues that this film director Pablo can be read as a fictionalization of the film director Pedro, and that intertextual quality that's in all the rest of his work, I think really lights up for the first time here.
And he runs with it. He never really put it down, right? I mean, the sense of people who desperately need to create at any cost. I mean, in a weird way, that's the skin I live in, which is this twisted Frankenstein revenge story. But it also plays with the fluidity of gender that's here in Law of Desire, where Carmen Maura can play a trans character, and it's early enough in the representation of trans people in film that you can't really object to it. Certainly, it doesn't feel like appropriation.
Well, and also, how great is it to have Carmen Maura, a cis woman, playing a trans woman in 1987?
Exactly.
And in 2013, we still had like Jared Leto playing Rayon in Dallas Buyers Club. The argument against casting cisgender men to play trans women, of course, should be pretty obvious by now, that it creates this feeling that it's a trick or it's a costume or it's role playing or it's not real. But of course, casting Carmen Maura to play a trans woman subconsciously reinforces that trans women are women. And everyone in the movie takes it as so natural, except these little characters around the edges who will sometimes say things like, she's just like a real girl. And the other person will say, yeah, of course. And then to cast Bibi Anderson, a trans actress, as the cisgender mother of one of the young characters, and just never bother troubling that, just take that at face value. Mm-hmm. It's this beautiful balancing act of representation. I think, you could make these casting choices today and still be ahead of the pack.
Yeah. Well, what I realized this time is that casting Mara short circuits it's exactly what you said. It short circuits the character's objections within the world of the film. Because we immediately just see, oh yeah, okay, that's a woman. And we don't think twice about it. And in fact, I'd forgotten the trans angle until it comes up in the first reel. And it's like, oh, right.
And it comes up out of her mouth. She says, I was a boy then.
Yes. Yeah.
And so she's in charge of the story. And that's a big part of her storyline, is that she is passionate about being in charge of her past. It's hers. Mm. And when she talks to the priest, that one gets a sense she, in her language, was in a relationship with. She says she doesn't want to. The priest says, "Move on from your past," like I have, and she says, "My memories are all I have." And then when her brother, the filmmaker, wants to cast her in a movie, but he warns her it's pretty close. The character's kind of got some affinities with your life. What do you mean? She starts to get, at that point, they're high on coke and they're getting paranoid, but the fight is based around, it's my past. Don't be very careful with what you do to my past. It's not yours, it's mine. And then when the brother filmmaker becomes an amnesiac, because it's a melodrama, mm-hmm. and she has to tell him their shared history, she's terrified that he won't remember, because she realizes it's not her past, it's their past, and she wants to be able to share it with him. So really, who controls her story, who owns it, and who she shares it with is the big driving force of her whole story.
And the other thing of that sequence, that like the underlying truth of it, is that she needs him to validate the experience that they had together, that he was just as much the keeper of their shared history. And I still don't think she fully accepts in that moment that she has to let go of it, but she wants to share it.
Yeah, and that's how the movie in the end becomes really about, and so much of Almodovar's work becomes about community and ultimately queer families and chosen families, and who are the people we surround ourselves with. And that's how we build identity, is through community.
Yeah. And shared narratives and shared. Well, I was going to say you could extend it to what Antonio is doing, but you can't because he's delusional. Like he's created a world in which he owns everyone and can do with them whatever he wants.
In a way, that's his tragic flaw. He's single-minded in his desire. He wants to own Pablo all to himself. He's the stalker fan. It's just going to be him and Pablo together alone forever. And he'll possess anything that Pablo possesses. But this is the opposite of we're all in it together.
Exactly.
I will own you and only you is very different from we're all in it together.
Yeah. It's driven by what he thinks is the same sense of self-preservation, right? Like the sense of self, but he's completely wrong. And I know that it's largely because Banderas then became a massive star, but I'm fascinated by Almodovar's constant casting of him as deranged people, as people who are dangerous to others, and he catches something about Banderas, which is that he'll do it. That Banderas is willing to go all the way as an actor. Yeah. In this and in Matador and in Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, he's a threat, and he's really good at it.
Yeah, and then he goes off to North America and plays Zorro. And fine, good, great, go with God. But thank God he comes back to Spain to keep working with Pedro for the really, really good roles.
Yeah, he sees him, or they see each other.
And he can also bring a humanity to this character, because in how many movies would we see the stalker fan just get killed and then, oh, good, they're gone? We've eliminated the threat. Like even when Antonio Banderas' character, also named Antonio, he's stalked Pablo. He's killed Pablo's boyfriend, Juan. He's kidnapped Pablo's sister, Tina. And Pablo's on the phone to Tina to warn her. And he says, he's not bad. Yeah. He's just completely crazy.
Yeah.
And there's this understanding and empathy for him,
Yeah. He Almodovar, wants the best for all of his characters, which I think is the thing that I find the most baffling about his movies, because he puts them through the ringer. And kills a number of them, but he wants them to come out the other side, having if not learned anything, being stronger for the experience. The only time I've only interviewed him once, and it was for the Secret Movie Club screening of Parallel Mothers, which was a post-pandemic deal. I had to record it. I had to see the movie and then record the Q&A immediately afterwards. And so it's this devastating emotional finale, this, the unearthing and reburial of the bodies. And it's so powerful. And I'm just like, oh, now I have to talk to this guy right off the gate, right off the bat. And he was terrific, but he was so interested in how an audience would respond, because he knew this was going to be screened after the screening. It would follow the Q&A, the Q&A would follow the movie immediately. And he's kept addressing them, which was really sweet, I thought. And it's like, I hope you understand that this is what I wanted, and I hope you feel this, and I hope you feel that. And it was great, but it gave me a sense of what it is to be like an artist and a showman in Spanish cinema in a way that almost no one else has been.
Yeah, and when you think about his roots, talk about a showman. He was in punk bands during La Movida. He was showing his early silent Super 8 films in clubs and had a microphone and was doing all the voices himself. Like, absolute showman.
Yeah, which also sets up the opening of Law and Desire. He's used to it. It's a world he knows. And I also love the suggestion that is all that movie is, that it's just that one scene, that we've just witnessed the premiere of this short film that's being hailed as the kind of, feature-length art breakthrough that a short would never achieve that level of power except in this world, right? Where you can be renowned.
That's amazing. I've always just tried to imagine, what would the rest of the feature be if that's the ending?
Ah, okay.
Well, the other thing that strikes me is that everyone's reacting to the film as though it's the most moving, profound, sublime. And when they talk about all his other films, the doctor said, he's got amnesia. He says to the doctor, "What did I do?" The doctor says, you were a film director. His first question is, how were the films?
Yeah.
And the doctor says, in a really moving way, he says, marvelous. And so you get the sense that these films, whatever they are not like Almodovar's early farces and sex romps. They're maybe more like the reaction that he hopes this film and the following films are going to start getting for him.
Yeah, there's a, what is it, prophecy is destiny, that sort of thing going on.
Yeah. He's teaching us how to, just like Pablo is teaching Juan how to love him, just like Pablo is teaching Antonio how to love him, Pedro's teaching us how to love him.
Yeah. And it's interesting that both of Pablo's efforts result in nothing. Like, they come to nothing.
They come to disaster and tragedy.
Yeah, but he's not given the love that he wants in either case, right? In one case, it's denied him, and in the other, because he spends his time with Antonio, Antonio gets it in his mind to go out and clear the decks.
And Pablo swears he'll never write again because he realizes the typewriter has caused all this. And he throws it out the window and it falls in a dumpster and it explodes in a ball of fire, which is ridiculous, you know?
Hit a propane tank. I'm fine with it.
Sure. Except then, or it has an emotional truth, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And then you go to Pain and Glory later, and it's the opposite. It's the riff on Law of Desire that Pain and Glory is doing is that art does redeem. And, you know, he's re-inspired to make another film. At the beginning of the film, he can't make a film. And by the end of Pain and Glory, he's going to. And in fact, he makes the film that we've been watching moments of all the way through.
Which is probably my favorite meta-narrative device. The thing that the thing that's been prophesized is the thing that you're seeing.
Yeah, all along.
Yeah.
It was here all along. Yeah.
Yes. And it was, you know, the journey along the way, the friends we make along the way with heroin or whatever it is you want to say.
Yeah. That's the thing, too. I mean, I remember my mind being blown when I first saw this. It's a 1987 movie.
That's right.
And, you know, all the other films are kind of just arguments for gay people's right to exist. They're all very much like, please, we're noble victims. Spare a thought. Right. And here's this film where it's absolutely just taken as a given that all the characters are queer and that they all have these complicated, layered lives. And yeah, let's go in the bathroom and do some lines of coke. And there's no big punishment for doing some drugs because they're at a party. So it's not a traditional North American moral universe. You know, it's not an ABC after school special writ large. It's real adult queer characters having real adult queer lives, and that being comforting, even when things go wildly off the rail.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Sony's tangled Madam Web, for good or ill, mostly ill, and Arrow's new discs of Narc, The Tin Star, Murphy's War, and Night Falls of Manhattan, 4 very different movies that are all ultimately about the same thing. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link in the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I mean, even for Spain, which is still pretty Catholic, it's not dealing with any of the oppression or the overtones that you might expect. The church is around, but they're not a force for good necessarily. I mean, Tina takes comfort in the hymns, but as a sign of how far she's come, I suspect, like it's the thing that she's retained, she's chosen to retain from her youth.
Yeah, and Tina and Ada have a May cross in the living room, and they're constantly praying to the Virgin for miracles. It's just that it's a more Protestant kind of thing where they've eliminated the Catholic Church as a middleman.
That's true, and the miracles don't quite land the way they were expected.
But little Ada believes in them all because everything she prays for seems to come true immediately. They get work because he puts them in a play, and you know Pablo comes to them, like she prays for him to be there, and he arrives at the door, and then she hears, you know, it's not true, but she hears that Pablo's dead. And then she immediately prays to the Virgin that he should be, you know, resuscitated, revived, revivified. And, you know, she believes he's been brought back to life when he walks in the scene. So there's this beautiful leitmotif of this child's belief.
Yeah. And every time I think about it, I am shocked to remember that that's Manuela Velasco, who went on to make the Rec movies.
Yeah.
It's like first of all, she has the same face, so it's bizarre that I haven't noticed. She's got this incredible wide smile and pointy chin. But yeah, it's one of those things that makes no logical sense, but that of course that's how careers work, right? I mean, she's so good in this that she would get people would keep an eye on her, but just to come out and do the other side of it, to make these garish found footage horror movies, which somehow are just as much in conversation with the buried religiosity and strange secrets of Spanish history. It's yeah, I regret never asking him what he thinks about that, because that's the one question. Honestly, at this point, that is the one question I would ask him. Do you watch the Wreck movies and do you enjoy them?
Amazing.
It feels like he would.
Chance. He's not going anywhere. You're going to get a chance.
Yeah, I hope so. I missed him this year for Strange Way of Life. Have you seen that?
No, I'm dying to. I don't know how. Is it on a platform yet?
If it isn't, it's coming. Sony Classics has the rights.
I couldn't get a ticket at TIFF. I just couldn't get in. But
yeah, Mongrel opened it. They released it with The Human Voice, I think, in a double bill of the two feature-length shorts, or the short features.
Let's talk about this. Like Law of Desire and The Human Voice and Pain and Glory is a perfect Almodovar triple bill.
Yeah. Carry on.
Oh, well, I mean, in Law of Desire, the play that Pablo is staging, that he puts Tina and Ada in, is his adaptation of Jean Cocteau's The Human Voice, which then, of course, decades later, he actually makes as a short film starring Tilda Swinton. And then comes Pain and Glory, where the main character, Antonio Banderas, now playing the Pedro stand-in, Salvador Mayo, which is almost an anagram for Soyo Almodovar, is looking back on this film he made 30 years ago, which we can kind of understand to be Law of Desire. And it's called Flavor. And, it's playing with this open secret that Almodovar didn't get along with the actor who played Pablo in Law of Desire. I heard him say once that the only problem was that they were on opposite drugs, because Almodovar was, of course, very excitable and full of energy. And, maybe the actor playing Pablo was on downers. So in Pain and Glory, it becomes that actor was on heroin, but when they're reunited, the Almodovar character has all this chronic pain because he's old now. And so why not? They both just start doing heroin together as buddies. And it's not something that in the end we don't get a junkie narrative. We don't get a tragedy of drug addiction, and we don't get a moralizing about heroin. We just eventually get him not needing it anymore. And seeing that it's hurt, people he loves. And then you've got the Federico character in Pain and Glory, who's very much like I think of him as a Juan type from Law of Desire. Like maybe they're both inspired by the same real life boyfriend of Almodovar's in my fantasy of what his real life might be. But you kind of can't go all the way to Pedro's real life ever, because he's giving you enough to work with in the movies. Like it would be silly to try to go, who was the original boyfriend that inspired Juan, and is it the same boyfriend who inspired Federico? It's a type in his symbology.
Yeah, no, he creates, I'm quite sure, idealized versions of everyone.
Yeah.
So he can see what happens when he puts them together. And they might not even have coexisted in the same time, but I never get the sense that it's a stranger to him. Like, he knows all of these characters intimately. Women on the Verge was this pinball machine of three-dimensional personalities just colliding with each other. And I'm sure that was the first of his films that I saw.
Yeah, it was the big breakout.
Yeah, and it was the one that definitely I was already covering movies when the press screening of that one happened. So I remember where and when I saw it, as opposed to these, which I caught up to like by buying tickets and going to see them like a schnook.
And I think that like Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown was originally, it started life as a loose adaptation of The Human Voice by Jean Cocteau. You've got Carmen Mara on another red telephone with the lover who's trying to leave her. But then eventually it broadened, and the man actually, instead of being absent, he gets introduced to the screwball plot, and it becomes much bigger than The Human Voice. But that's like, Law of Desire was, I think, just 1 year before Women on the Verge. Like, they're, again, very related, very much sharing a DNA.
Yeah, and the point of entry is the same, I think, for Almodovar both times. Like he just wants to understand why this play means something to him.
Yeah, yeah. This feeling of passionate loss when a lover leaves you and you still need them, and uh, it's that all-consuming desire that Pablo in Law of Desire says he wants and is trying to teach Juan how to give him, that then Antonio shows up with the real thing, and it's a tragedy in the end because that's where that kind of desire leads to.
Yeah, the family stays intact, but everyone has to be threatened with absolute, Armageddon in order
Now,
to reunite.
in the ultimate kind of love, like, I don't know, that complexity of not just something being simply bad, you get the sense that Pablo's going to have this quote unquote great love to remember for the rest of his life. He's mourning the death of Antonio, who tore his life apart. And there's this montage where we see Tina remembering, and what she's remembering is the man that left her originally, that she was in love with, who is her own father in an incestuous relationship, but she hasn't moralized that. She loves him and he left her, and that great, criminal love will always be with her, and she'll always kind of miss it. Even though, she's must be better off without it, just like Pablo must be better off without Antonio. And but he'll always have him. And the songs, like these nostalgic songs about remembering a great love that are all over this movie, support it, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to understand, or not trying to understand. This time through, I was trying to figure out if Tina's situation with her father, with her memories of her father specifically, is a way of acknowledging that for good or ill, we are defined by our key relationships, or if it's just a device in the film to demonstrate, the split between Pablo and Tina and how they had to eventually find their way back to each other. I honestly don't know. Like, I can't tell. I think maybe it's both, but
Yeah.
clearly Pablo has had his own issues with that relationship and either never expressed them to Tina because he supports her, or they did and it's so far behind them that it's not even a thing anymore. I was sort of looking for a close reading there, and I could
Yeah.
not find it.
Well, now Pablo has his own version of that.
That's true. Now he lives through his own, so we
But
don't
you
get to
don't
see
get
the
a
next
sense
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could unpack it to the degree that his sister had it and he never did, and that's why he's trying to teach Juan how to do it. But that's not. I don't think that's. I think that's just shown by Almodovar to be something we should all want. Like, we should all want this great, passionate, criminal, all-consuming desire and love, especially to look back on with a sense, a complicated nostalgia. What's great is that that's presented as, why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah, I went back and looked up some older reviews or some contemporaneous reviews of the film, and at least two or three people came away insisting that the reason Tina had the sex change was because of the abusive incestuous relationship. I don't know that that's true. I
I
don't
think
know that.
Almodovar is careful. He has Pablo say, would you have done it anyway? And she goes, probably.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's positive for her. Like, it's not some kind of trauma response. She's clearly who she's supposed to be.
Yeah, she's very clearly a woman.
It's such a weird territory. And to imagine that being investigated in 1987 at a time when, we didn't have the language. The film almost has it, but it doesn't quite have the language that we use now, right? The terminology's evolved, but also the common understanding has evolved of who people are, and how gender and biology are separate things, or can be. And the thing that amazes me now is how easy, no one in the movie is struggling with the language. There's no sense. There's a conversation between the cop and his son where people are just like, one guy's a dick about it. That's all there is to it. And it's not because he doesn't understand. It's because he won't accept it.
Yeah.
And there is no difficulty anywhere else. Nothing is portrayed as, the movie is in its way making a groundbreaking narrative out of a trans character's presence, but the trans narrative is just accept it. It's already there. It's over by the time we get there. It's just, this is who she is, full stop. And everyone accepts it. Everyone understands it.
Yeah, just like all the queer relationships, just like everything he's taking as a given. He's not asking us to, he's not making a case to please accept these characters.
Yes,
like,
that's
come
it.
on along. This is the story.
Yeah.
And a few people around the edges that do sort of make a thing out of the fact that Tina is a trans woman are presented as losers. And we don't spend much time on them.
Yeah. It's true. It's just how I assume it's just how Almodovar sees them. It's like, oh, these guys aren't going to amount to anything. They're just don't pay attention. And they're all guys.
Yeah. And or even like
Well, the priest doesn't recognize her. Sort of does, but doesn't.
yeah, he recognizes the voice a little, the singing, and then he recognizes the eyes. Yeah, and in one interview, I heard Almodovar being asked about casting the trans actress Bibi Anderson, who I think now goes by Bibiana Martinez, possibly. Anyway, the trans actress who plays the cisgender mother of Ada. And his response was just like, oh, like, were you trying to make a point? Were you trying to balance representation? He was just like, no, I've always just known Bibi as a woman, so I cast her to play a woman. And it's just this very simple, well, she's a woman. Why would I not cast her to play a woman? And Hollywood's not there yet. You don't see a ton of trans actresses playing cis characters. We should, but we don't yet.
The only one I can think of is Patty Harrison in Together Together.
Yeah, right.
Where she plays a pregnant woman, like a pregnant cisgender woman. And it's revolutionary and it's invisible because you're not supposed to notice. And I interviewed the filmmaker. That was another Secret Movie Club, I think. Yes, it was. We talked about that, and she said, yeah, it's just casting. Like, she's great. We want her energy. And if it's revolutionary, it's incidental to the story. You can watch the movie and never know, and it doesn't matter. But we know, and we're really proud of the performance, not the accomplishment, but the performance, which, again, I think that's ultimately the only thing that matters, right? Like, that's the record. The film is the thing that anyone wants to be remembered.
Yeah. Just like, what does Tina want in Law of Desire? I mean, she's an actress. She wants good parts, and she wants her brother to put her in this play, and then she wants her brother to put her in the movie, and then she has to come to terms with how she's going to dig into her own past to play this role. But this isn't exclusive to being trans.
It's more, I mean, I would have thought that nepotism would be more of a concern in the world of the film, but clearly that's not a thing either. They just collaborate all the time, as do Pedro and his brother.
Yeah, I love the way Pedro and his brother keep showing up as hardware store clerks.
Yes, I did notice that.
I love it. Pedro shows up in Law of Desire as a hardware store clerk, selling tools to Antonio Banderas. And then in The Human Voice, Agustin Almodovar shows up as a hardware store clerk, selling tools to Tilda Swinton in, again, The Human Voice, And in The Human Voice, the character is wrecking an apartment. And in Law of Desire, Antonio is using those tools to fix Pablo's apartment. And so it's all, but it's who's providing the movie with its hardware? It's the Almodovar brothers.
Yeah. They're actually literally building the worlds that we're watching, and they're in there as vendors. It's
and it happens also in, is it Voltaire, where Agustin Almodovar shows up again as a hardware store clerk. Yeah, selling
I think it is.
Penelope Cruz the tools she needs to dispose of the dead body.
Yeah, yeah.
Here, you'll need this to advance the plot. Have this rope.
Yeah, it's like Linklater does it in Waking Life, where he shows up as himself, giving a little bit of a speech about the metatextuality of his movie. But this is even more literally metatextual. They're just like, no, the movie can't progress if you don't get this. Here, I will hand it to you. I kind of love it.
Yeah.
And they look like little cherubs. It's just the shape of their faces. They're not gods. They're just helpers.
Can you imagine how great that must be for those two, who I believe still go to the movies together twice a week, to just get to make decades of the world's best movies together?
It's a good gig.
Good. Nice work if you can get it.
Yeah. And to literally enrich the world, like, and themselves, because they own their movies, but to be able to have, well, I mean, I guess the Coens are the only other example I can think of, and they just had a little split, although they're getting back together for another film now.
Yeah, but you also still get the sense that the Coens have to, like, pitch and like
There's work for hire in there. Yeah.
and deal with test screenings and all that stuff that I think the Almodovars just go, okay, what's next? And there's all these producerly characters in the films that are just there to protect and enable the filmmaker character, either in life or in work, you know.
That's true. Yeah. They're throwing lifelines to each other from behind the camera.
I've just been sort of thinking about this so much, especially because, you know, Christopher Nolan and his lady wife, who is also his producer, just won so many Oscars between them. And then like even like Fazia Mirza just made her wonderful
My Dreams, yeah.
Dreams, and her wife, Andrea Wilson Mirza, produced it. Like I'm just watching for all of these people who are related either by blood or marriage to their producers. And you know, I don't know. The feeling like is it too late to not be an only child here? Can I get a producer out of this bargain somehow? But
there is absolutely something to be said for people who have artistic partners that aren't motivated by responsibility to an external, right? To a studio or to another producer, where someone has your back creatively for this project and the next 6. Like it's not just this one.
If you're lucky, you can find it for one, but like someone who's like in it for the long haul. I used to direct the improv soaps in Edmonton, the live improvised soap opera. And whenever we were picking like a setting, it had to work for 8 months because every Monday we would improvise and what you improvise becomes your storyline. And then next Monday you pick up where you left off.
Okay.
And what we found was like early on, we found that if we picked, say, like a workplace setting, it didn't work great because the stakes weren't high enough. You could always just quit. But if you pick relationships where there's no getting out of that relationship without changing your whole life, that is a juicy relationship full of high stakes for a soap opera, for a melodrama, for the work of Almodovar, both inside and outside the frame.
I never really thought about that, but yeah, it's a brilliant engine too, because if you stay with the same people, you will find new conflicts as opposed to having to repeat the same ones over and over again.
Or it'll be the same thing, but slightly different, just like every movie of Almodovar's.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I've been trying to figure out a way to fold in your film in the course of the conversation, but I don't have to. I can just go straight to the question. Because I was trying to figure out, is there a graceful way to hook it from the trans narratives of this film and Almodovar's other films to before I changed my mind. But that's not. I kept coming up against a speed bump, which is that is not what your movie is really about. Like it's just not. And for people who haven't seen it but who are now very curious, I hope, is there something of Almodovar's, and I'll set this up in the intro, because your film is set in the 80s and it's very much a Canadian narrative. It's not about the things that Law of Desire is about, but is there a commonality? Is there any kind of even a personal reference point that reflects itself back through your film?
Tons. I mean, my movie is set in 1987, which is the year Law of Desire came out. You know, the quick pitch for my movie is new kid Robin shows up in junior high school and all the other students wonder if Robin's a boy or a girl. The movie never goes there. It doesn't, there's no big gender reveal trope. Like the question gets raised and then abandoned, and it becomes a story about Robin falling in with the school bully and making increasingly dangerous choices to get popular. So you've got this antagonist love interest, this I don't know, not as strong as, you know, Antonio's murderous, passionate character in Law of Desire, but you've got, you know, bad choices are being made. There's this triangular structure, I think, like in Law of Desire, it's Antonio and Antonio lies to Juan and says, Pablo loves me. And that's how you break into the third act. And in our movie, Izzy lies to Carter and says, I kissed Robin. And that is what really pushes Carter into the deep end. Even though it's a lie, we just saw Izzy try to kiss Robin and Robin dodge it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it felt to me as though the film is being framed through Robin's present day memory. Like we're seeing a memory.
Gorgeous. Yeah. And I think that in Law of Desire, you get the sense that everything's being set up to be a memory later. I mean, Robin, people say, oh, it's about a non-binary kid in 1987. And I say, well, not really, because in 1987, non-binary would have sounded like a computer word,
Yeah.
which is as an in-joke why we made Robin's dad an IP expert. I don't want to imply that Robin's character, who walks in at the beginning of the movie to a gym class where the boys are on this side of the gym wearing this, and the girls are on that side of the gym wearing that, and Robin's told to go sit down. So Robin sits at the back in the middle, not choosing a side. That's as close as I get to saying non-binary. Certainly in Robin's real life, they would then be handed a gendered gym uniform that matches what it says on the paper. But the experiment with Before I Changed My Mind was what happens if we don't point the camera at that? What happens if, off screen, the kid's getting gendered pronouns all the time, but in the movie, what if we just happen to never hear them? In a conservative space, like Alberta in the 80s, conservative space, and Madrid for Law of Desire, it's just waking up from like the Franco regime. So, I mean, Ralph Klein was no Franco, but it wasn't the most welcoming place for queer teens like myself. Still isn't.
I was going to say, yeah.
I think also I was inspired by the moments of performance in Law of Desire that are commentary on the actions and motivations of the characters. I love that. Like you see the movie that Pablo's making, and you see the play that Tina and Ada are performing, and so in Before I Changed My Mind, there's a stage musical, a community theater adaptation, well, sort of a riff on Jesus Christ Superstar. The joke is the community theater couldn't get the rights, so the community theater director, played by me, has written an original musical from Mary Magdalene's point of view. But all of that is so that like we can have this sort of satire layer where Mary Magdalene can say to Jesus, like, what even are we, boyfriend and girlfriend or what? And that works as a satire of like, ooh, what are Robin and Carter? And oh, what are Annie and Daniel? So I that's definitely a trick I learned from watching all the Almodovar movies. And then, I mean, right down to the fact that like there's a surprising but not unpredictable ending that involves a form of self-sacrifice and fire. So I think I stole a lot and put it in my little 80s coming of age movie.
I mean, all cinema is conversation. I think you're allowed.
Well, I love and I'm inspired by all of the films of Almodovar, but I think Law of Desire is going to be for me that passionate love that I'll remember all my life.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I will try to help you find a Blu-ray player so you can have a proper version of it.
Thank you very much.
My thanks to Trevor Anderson, whose first feature, Before I Changed My Mind, is now available on digital and on demand across North America. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Trevor on Instagram at Trevor_EH. That's Trevor A. And you can find Law of Desire on DVD from Sony Pictures Home Entertainment and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. There's also a very good Studio Canal Blu-ray in the UK for those of you with multi-region players, and for those of you who don't have one, consider this an unsolicited plug for 220 Electronics in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Google them now. Thank me later. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.